I was midway through my 5th year of primary school when this happened. I was leaving the school at the end of the day and was doing my usual thing of travelling by foot to my house, as it was only 3 blocks away from the school. Occasionally, I would walk with my friends as their houses were either nearby or were just on the way past mine. However, this afternoon I was travelling by myself, and I made sure that after this day I would never walk home from school alone, ever again. For the first block, my walk had gone no different from the ordinary. I had my music blasting through my earphones and multiple cars had driven by. However, as I reached the second block, I very faintly heard the noise of a car pulling over behind me, despite the fact my ears were occupied by the music. I turned my head and saw a generic white van pulled over, with its engine still running. Obviously, I didn't worry about it, as I just presumed it was a person going on about their business, so I kept walking. However, about 10 meters of walking later, I glanced around again to see the van, no further distance away from me as before. It had moved with me. I kept walking with my head turning constantly. I began feeling a wave of fear as I realized the van was moving at a slow rate, following me. I couldn't get a proper look at the driver, but I could see that it was a man. The van then began to speed up until it was level with me. I saw the window roll down, and inside was a man, middle-aged, with a dark blue cap and a black t-shirt.
Hey little girl, I just saw you walking along and was wondering if you'd like a lift home to save you the trouble of walking,
he said, with a smile. I politely declined, informing him that my house was very close by and there was really no point.
Oh, well I'm sure it's still much easier and quicker if I just drive you.
I was now beginning to feel very uncomfortable to say the least, and I was about to decline for the second time when he then started complimenting me, but his comments started becoming very creepy.
You're such a gorgeous little girl. Come on, just hop in here and let me take you home. It's dangerous for a beautiful little girl to be walking home alone.
I felt a cold shiver run down my back as he said this. I declined again, but this time much firmer. In fact, very firm. Suddenly, his smile dramatically changed into a look of anger.
Get in the damn car now.
I lost it and began to sprint in the direction of my house. I heard the car beginning to accelerate behind me. With the seconds I had to make a decision, I considered my options. I could either run all the way home or enter a neighbour's house immediately. My house was still just over a whole block away, and that would easily give the man time to catch up. Plus, I didn't want him to find out where I really lived. So when I reached the corner of the current block, I bolted around the corner and entered the first house, spamming the doorbell and banging the door frantically. However, after about 5 seconds of no one answering the door, I headed for the backyard. As I ran, I heard the noise of the van turning the corner, and I hid behind the nearest bush, peeping my head over. The van slowed down and stopped right outside the house. I creeped over to the backyard and waited for about 20 minutes, even though it felt like hours. I couldn't call anyone, as my parents wouldn't allow me to have my own phone at this age. So I slowly tiptoed around the side of the house to the front and was relieved that the van was nowhere in sight. Once I checked every direction, I sprinted home, not looking behind me once. I basically fell into my mum's arms when I got home, and she immediately called the police and the school. However, all I could give the police was the man's description and the van he was driving, but I hadn't taken note of the number plate in my panic. Nothing ever came of that incident ever again, but I had trouble sleeping for nights afterwards. I never walked alone anywhere again until I was much older. And even now, I still always keep one ear free when wearing earphones and pay full attention to my surroundings. This happened during my Year 9 school camp in winter. I was 14 at the time, and always enjoyed playing footy with my friends during lunch breaks and whenever we had free time. On one night during this weekly camp, my friends and I decided that we'd have a kick of the football on the public oval, located near the building we were currently staying in. The teachers allowed us to do this under the circumstance that we stick together as a group. At the time, I didn't think about it, but now that I look back at what happened, it was irresponsible that none of the teachers came with us. Anyway, my friends and I went out to the oval at around 4:30 PM before it was dark and had a great time kicking the footy and just enjoying each other's company. Eventually, it started to get dark as night time was approaching. My friends decided it was time to call it a day by about 6 o'clock. I, however, wanted to continue practicing my goal kicking. My friends reminded me of what the teachers had said, but my immature, stupid self said that I wouldn't be long and would be back soon afterwards. My friends were reluctant, but they eventually conformed and just left the oval in the direction of the building. I was now alone and began practicing my goal kicking. I'd been alone for about 10 minutes kicking the footy when I noticed a figure out of the corner of my eye. At the time it was hard to make it out due to the darkness surrounding the oval. However, there was still just enough light to allow me to see enough of the figure outside of the oval to work out that it was a man. This man was about medium height, but that's all I could describe from the distance. The thing that I thought was unusual at the time was that the man was just standing there, looking at the ground. And as cliche as it sounds, I didn't really think that much of it, as I was just a very tall boy for my age, probably about 6'1", and I generally didn't feel threatened by others. So I continued what I was doing. After another minute, I glanced back to see that the man was now inside the oval, on the complete opposite side, just staring at me. I tried to ignore it and continue kicking the footy, but I couldn't focus now. I was now too scared to look back, as I was worried that if I did, he'd be right next to me, still staring. Now that I look back at the situation, I just should have listened to my instincts and gone back to the apartment. As I picked up the footy, I decided to take a slow glance back in the direction of where the man last was. He was now walking along the boundary line near the fence, but he still had his eyes locked on me. I could now see that he was a man of probably an Asian or perhaps Indian descent, wearing tattered jeans and a black hoodie. I walked in the direction of the 50-metre line to take another shot, but to the opposite boundary line where he was. I rushed my kick due to my mind being distracted by the man, and the ball ended up about 3 metres directly in front of the goal square. I jogged to get it with my head facing downwards, avoiding to look at what the man was doing. However, as I picked up the ball and glanced up, I was now horrified to see that he was walking directly towards me, still staring. Finally, my common sense kicked in and I decided it was time to leave. I began walking away from him at a speedy pace. I heard his footsteps behind me and I could swear he was gaining on me. I was about to begin running when I heard him say,
Hey, can I just ask for your help? I'm lost.
This comment left me in slight confusion about what to do, but I told myself that maybe he really was just lost and maybe he just wanted directions. I could also now tell that from his voice he was Indian. I stopped and turned around to see him now only a metre away from me, slowly approaching me. I expected him to tell me where he was heading, but the 3 words that instead came out of his mouth sent immediate chills down my spine. He came closer and placed his arm firmly on mine and said,
Come with me. Now.
My body was frozen for a second as the most cold, disturbing smile developed upon his face. As soon as I managed to contemplate what he had said, I managed to scream out the words "fuck off" before turning and sprinting in the direction of the apartment building, feeling the adrenaline pumping and a feeling of fear I've never ever experienced in my life before. As I ran, I was horrified when I turned my head back to see the man in full pursuit, chasing after me. Now at the time I would have considered myself fit and reasonably fast due to my love for sport, but even with my speed and adrenaline, he was still managing to keep up with me. It became clear that this guy was fast, a lot faster than I expected, as he seemed to be in his 40s. I kept sprinting, hearing his footsteps loud and clear behind me. I lunged myself over the oval fence, which was about the height of my hips, scraping my leg on the way over, but I couldn't have cared at the time. To my horror, the sound of him going over the fence hit my ears. He was still chasing, more determined than I'd expected. When I got to the traffic lights, I managed to cross when there was a flashing red man, which implied that the lights were about to change. I stopped once I had successfully crossed and looked back to see the man across the road, about halfway between the fence he had climbed over and the road itself. He had stopped and was just standing there staring at me. I stood there looking at him for what felt like an eternity before he finally turned around and walked in a different direction. I stood outside the building where the others were, catching my breath and taking in what had just happened. Now you'd think that I would have immediately told my friends, the teachers, and called the cops. Nope, I didn't tell anyone. I don't know why, but I guess I was just worried at the time that I would get into trouble for staying back at the Oval alone. Or I was just too traumatized and didn't want to bring it up. I eventually told my cousin a month later, and he was horrified. But to this day, he's the only person I've ever told. I never ever saw that man again, and I don't wish to.